Hello, my name is Shama. I am the program director here at Girls and Geese. I'm just hanging out here with my sea turtle friends, waiting for the Reusings to show up. I know you all are aware of who Kendall Reusing is. She is a multiple-time world champion in both gi and no gi. She's an ADCC finalist, in addition to being a USA four-time wrestling national champion. She has a phenomenal career in jiu-jitsu as well as in wrestling. Her mother, Holly, is also a black belt, got her start in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu in California at Hickson Grace's Academy in 1995. She is not only an academy owner as well as a black belt. She is also a psychologist with a master's degree in marriage and family counseling. She has been doing coursework for her PhD in order to further her education in psychology. She is not only a wealth of knowledge in raising tremendous young women, but in running an academy, as well as has been submerged into the jiu-jitsu community for over 20 years. The youngest daughter in the family is Emma Reusing. Emma Reusing is also an avid athlete in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. She has had a very phenomenal wrestling career, and she is studying to be a veterinarian currently. I'm super excited to have these individuals on today to talk about all things parenting and jiu-jitsu, to dive a little bit deeper into how jiu-jitsu has played a factor in their family dynamic and in raising their daughters. So please join me and the Reusings as we go ahead and dive deep into learning more about how jiu-jitsu can be used as a tool in parenting. And we talk about all things that are involved in jiu-jitsu community that impacts families as well as parents and young children. So thank you so much for tuning in today. Let's go ahead and get started. I'm so happy to get to talk to all of you like in kind of real life. Awesome. So thank you so much for being on. I really appreciate, like I said, having all of you on is such a unique opportunity for our listeners to learn from all of your perspectives. And I really wanted to kind of dive in and start off by talking about how your jiu-jitsu journey, who was the first in the family to start and how that kind of evolved, because that's always super interesting to me.
Mom, you want to take that one? I mean, I
Who
was
was
the
first?
start, but my mom was definitely exposed first, not by her own will, but she was exposed. So you want to take that one?
Well, I was thinking about something in the middle of the night. I don't know, with your dad. So back in '94, we were in Atlanta, and there was a lot of discussion about heading to the West Coast to train with Hickson. And I didn't know too much about what that meant, but I realized that just reflecting the 20, however many, almost 30 years ago, I think I was really dead set on hitching the ride to California with your dad. And little did I know how much jiu-jitsu was going to play a big part in that. So and I have that telltale regret that so many people have once they do start training, because it was literally like 2006 when I did start training. And I had that huge, like, that so many people have, oh, if only I would have started when I was 28, when I first got exposed to this. So you guys don't have that. But technically speaking, the first person to start training that's on out of the three of us is you.
Yeah, it's funny. I always think of the story that you tell about dad when you guys moved to Temecula, because he had been training with Hickson and then moved to Temecula to raise kids. It was like, they found this amazing property with all these trees and creeks. I mean, it was like the coolest place to grow up, but there wasn't really jiu-jitsu there. And then one day my dad came home, and I guess this would have been in 2001 or 2002, because I was like 4 or 5, came home and he was like, Holly, you'll never believe what I found today. I found this is going to change our lives. This is going to be the best thing that ever happened for our
This is
family.
going to be so great for our family.
What? She's like, what?
I found
And
a
he's like,
Gracie Baja. I found a guy who's affiliated with Gracie Baja, and they have kids. And
and
there's
she's
a
like, I
judo
thought we
place,
were, I
and there's
thought
a
we were
judo
done with
place
this.
right on the other side. It couldn't be any better.
Oh my God. And she's like, I thought we were done with this jujitsu thing. Like, I thought this was over. And he's like, no, Kendall's gonna love this. So I I went and trained, and I mean, the rest is history. I think the main thing, and I were trying to talk a lot about parenting today, but I think the main thing is like from day one, it was just they thought it was cool that I was having fun and that I wanted to go back. So they were like, okay, we'll take you back. And so I had a lot of fun. And then little by little, my dad always makes the joke that like my mom might feel differently about this, but my dad always makes the joke like, oh yeah, Holly realized one day that Kendall was going to ask for the keys and it was going to be a rhetorical question. So that she had to start training jiu-jitsu too. But I also think that, you know, there's an aspect of things where there weren't, as you know, like there weren't really any women on the mats in those days. And it wasn't an appealing environment for women. Like it wasn't an exciting perspective to do. So I think there's something to be said for like when the kids are into it, and then not only are you forced to be in the gym the whole time, but there's a little bit of like the door gets cracked open when your daughters are training instead of being like, oh, what are you guys doing over there? So anyway, some more exposure to the environment. But I thought it was the coolest thing ever when my mom was training. Like it was like you had such a badass. It was like, oh, my mom, like your mom doesn't train, my mom trains. Like my mom's cool. She beats up all the guys. And then Emma kind of followed shortly after. Emma's different. She didn't like training as much when she was younger, and now she's super scary. So we've all had very, I would say what's interesting about us three and my dad too, but us three is like we've all had a very different, unique experience with jujitsu, but we all have some of the same core appreciations or threads now that we can look back at, but our journeys through were very different.
Very cool. Actually, how you have a very similar story. I'd been around jujitsu since 97 when I was in high school. And it wasn't until 2003 that they finally forced me onto the mats. It was like, you have to do this, Shama. Like, you've been around it for so long, you got to try it. But that's awesome. The reason I was curious too is because I do see doing what I do, I see so many moms coming in because their kids train, right? Same thing. And so I was curious if mom came first or if the kids came first. So it's really interesting to learn that part of your story. I wanted to talk a little bit to you, Holly, and I definitely want you all to input in as well, Kendall and Emma, is how do you think that jujitsu has influenced your parenting at all?
For sure it has. While we were answering the first question, I was reminded of another story that I tell where my dad used to say, and back in those early years with Tom's jiu-jitsu, I remember him saying to me one time on the phone, when is this jiu-jitsu stuff gonna, kind of wrap up or something? When is he gonna really focus on his career? And the funny thing about that is that my dad both sides of my family were very high level tennis players and also coaches and teachers and ran, programs in different places. But my dad opted out. My dad was the one out of all those people that could have had a really high level tennis career. And he opted into, his 4 years in the Navy and then also his career and starting a family. But during his middle age, he became one of the top tennis players in the country. And so when he said that, so I grew up watching tennis every spare minute of my life. When I wasn't doing gymnastics, I also, that's another part of the story. I did a lot of gymnastics as a young girl. But anyway, when he said that to me, I was like, Dad, like of all the people to ask a question like that, like, really? Are you serious? And anyway, it's um, the parenting influence that jujitsu has had is so vast. I wasn't even sure, I didn't even realize that that was going to be the topic for today, but it's a great, great question. The initial period when I started training, I was in school And I decided to focus my studies on women training. And so that dovetailed with, after my resistance of years with Tom saying, I just want you to learn the moves. And I was like, I don't want to learn the moves, or I just certainly didn't understand the relevance of the moves, how important it was.
Mm-hmm.
But I remember him just in the kitchen, let me just show you this. Let me just show you this. I just want you to learn how to do these things. And I knew how almost desperate, I don't want to use the word desperate, but he was going to be to have these girls learn these moves, whatever they were, right? So and by that time I'd been around enough and seen a few little girls, watched Kendall competing with the boys. And I had done 1 degree in counseling, and then I really wanted to go back to school and get deeper into the Jungian studies. And I kind of figured out a way to go back to school. And Tom was like, didn't you just finish school? And I'm like, yeah, I know, but I think I can go back up there and study jujitsu. And so my real beginning to all that, it doesn't seem like it's lost now, but it just seems like a really long time ago, because it was so much has happened in jujitsu since then. But back in those days, you could literally almost reach out to all the women that were training. You could just kind of find them all. And I had these little Yahoo groups. I tried to get people talking, and I did a lot. And I was looking at Kendall and knowing that she was in love with it. She was going to keep, it seemed like she loved it so much. So the parenting piece became really, really key, because obviously, we were very concerned with raising we had a huge emphasis on raising the children kind of from I guess you could say, like, from a spiritual perspective or some sort of progressive perspective. So we certainly weren't gonna, even Tom, I mean, I said that before, but even if she didn't like it, even if I don't think he would have ever tried to, we just kind of met them where they were at.
Mm-hmm.
So that's how it all started. I saw Kendall doing it. I saw her in love with it. I felt it was an incredibly dynamic environment. I knew she was going to be a minority for a very long time. And I was like, all right, I'm going to jump on this, and I'm going to dig in. I'm going to figure out, because this isn't going anywhere. We're in this for the long haul, it looks like. So I want to do a good job with it. And I literally ended up with doing my PhD. It took many years to finish it. But so it's a funny thing, because it wasn't like it was for Kendall.
Mm-hmm.
But, people asked me, we didn't open the first school until many years later. But people asked me for years, like, what did you ever do with your PhD? And they've heard me say this many times. I'm like, breathe. Everything that I do, and everything with regard to raising the kids, and the collaboration that Tom and I have had with the kids, with students, with the schools, and everything has been impacted and influenced by those early years of schoolwork. And there was a time too where and I'll wrap it up, but the beginning years when I started training, I had never really been the only of something before. So when I found myself in line, and I was like, wow, okay, I'm the only female. And obviously in jiu-jitsu, all of us know, like, things happen in jiu-jitsu that are unique. And at that time it was particularly unique. And if it wasn't for my schoolwork and Kendall, and not Emma at the time, because she was so little, she was 4 when I started, I think 4 or 5, I don't think I would have kept training. And then there was a period where I was so deep into my schoolwork that I really just felt like I'm stuck. Now I'm stuck. I got to keep training. And luckily I made it through some of those bumps, because I didn't, it was tough. And, there were some girls. So anyway, as far as parenting goes, I guess we can probably get a little more into that meat and potatoes as we go. But that gives a little bit of a foundation of why I jumped on the mats and what was happening at the time. The girls were really young and when it all started. And of course, we didn't have a crystal ball what was going to happen. They ended up leaving jiu-jitsu for many years to wrestle. And so that brought up other challenges. But as far as I'll just say this one story because it might not come up later. Parenting wise, there's honestly, as when you brought it up, I thought I I could I should maybe I should we should write a book about that because we have a dynamic now where if we go to a tournament, people will come up like, I mean, thank you so much for saying that the powerhouse mother daughter. That's amazing for someone to say. That's so wonderful thing to hear. But and I love it. And I'm like, oh, I didn't know. But you know, people will come up to us or will visit schools and people with small children that are doing jujitsu. And they're literally like, I can't wait. I can't wait. I want, and I'm like, oh my gosh, don't put that on your kid, you know, because it's a beautiful goal and in a way, but at the same time, I mean, the way that Kendall and Emma developed is so incredibly different, probably than people perceive. So being able to tell the story of how it actually happened as versus what people might project onto what happened, it's very, very different, I think, because with people telling me that at tournaments when their children are like 5 years old, or I'm like, oh no, like your kid might want to do soccer.
Or they'll ask, how do you do that? Like, what did you do to like make that happen? Or people ask me that all the time. They're like, what did your parents do to like make you da 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 da? And I'm like, oh geez, like I don't think there's a formula for this. I don't think that was their intention at all. Like they kind of let me run the show in a lot of ways and then supported things that made sense for me and worked really hard to be that support. But it wasn't like they were implanting ideas along the way, you know?
Yeah. No, and that's why I wanted to do this episode. And like I said, you really are the model. Like I can't tell you how many mother-daughter like pairs come to our events. And that's why I really love being able to do what I do, because not many mothers be able to get to have the opportunity to train with their daughters, right? There's kids class, there's adults class. And so I can't tell you how many mother daughters out there are looking at you guys and going, this is the goal, you know? And so that's why I think what you have to share today is so important, because maybe there is no formula, but you cracked the code somehow here, obviously.
Well, it's funny because the formula, like for example, Emma and I are similar in a lot of ways, and we're also very different in our journeys with jiu-jitsu. We're very, very different and continue to be different, but both equally valuable and special and enjoyable. And I would say like one of the coolest things that I think my parents would probably agree is that like Emma and I are both very happy people. Like we like our lives. And so jiu-jitsu, and that's really cool for a parent to be like, okay, great. My kids are pretty happy. That's a win. So with jiu-jitsu playing a big role in both of our lives, like it looks very different for us today, but it was always, I feel, up to us to be able to explore that. And then now if you zoom out, you know, Emma just turned 24, I'm 26 years later, and we both have positive relationships with jiu-jitsu, but also with our parents on the mat and can train with our parents and do different things. And sometimes I'm going and asking my dad for really strong competitive advice because I'm getting ready for something. But most of the time, like they don't even play that role. Like they're just there to be my parent. And like it has nothing to do with athletics. And then Emma can go and do, you know, her version of that. And then my parents are both there for us, for both of us when we compete, if we decide to compete. But we never, I don't feel like we were ever, which is not an easy thing to accomplish, put in the role of like, I'm your parent and I am running your athletic career and I'm coaching you and you better like, you know, I have these expectations that you better meet. It never ever felt like that at all. If anything, I feel like they were always really conscientious of like, Do we need to, get another coach to kind of run the show? Do we need to take our hands off of this? Okay, wait, maybe now we're seeing something that's like, this is not good for our kid. Let's step back in. Like, I can't imagine that being a really difficult line to walk, but it always felt to us, or to me, that our best interest was at heart, or our best interest was their primary focus in all of those decisions. So it was like, I mean, I don't think you could do it any better, honestly. It's a pretty big ask, especially when you do have kids that are, Emma and I are good at stuff that we do. Like, we work really hard. We're good at things. So when you have like that sort of promise start to develop, we see it all the time in the kids that we coach. I mean, in every industry and every sport, and you've seen it so many times too, but the parent starts to see the kid getting good at something and they're like, a radar, like, okay, career, what do we need? We're going to get you your strength and conditioning coach. We're going to da, 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 da. And it's like, I can imagine it being really easy to do that. And then I didn't have that experience. So I feel like now I have this freedom where it's like, no matter what I do, I feel supported. And like, I'm met with curiosity from not just my parents, my sister too. Like, and we learned that, I think, all from each other. Like, I'm met from my family members with curiosity around like what might be best, or what do you think, or what's feeling right, instead of like, here's what we need to make happen, let's all do it together. And it's like, God, that's really intense.
No, that's true. I mean, to be able to, from a child's perspective, to be able to notice that your parents are able to kind of wear those different hats and not put too much pressure in one area, that's hard. I mean, like you said, you see parents who aren't even their coaches who get all into it like they are, and it's like, whoa, settle down.
They don't even do jujitsu. Like, they don't
exactly.
even they're like, just get up, just don't let him do it. Don't let him do it. And you're like, oh my God, please. But what's funny is I'd be interested in hearing Emma's perspective too, because I think like I always wanted to be on the mats pretty much. Even when I wrestled, it was like a different environment, but I always wanted to be on the mat. So I think that was maybe a little bit easier in some ways than this is a question I get all the time, is what happens if my kid doesn't want to train? Like, especially mothers with daughters, they ask me this quite often. Like, at a seminar, I'll do a Q&A, right? And every single time, what happens when my kids don't want to train? Because I really want them to learn self-defense. And this is really important for them to be able, like, my dad in the kitchen, let me just show you this move. Like, you need to know how to do the move. So I'm curious, like, what Emma's perspective on that would be, because I think there's a lot of different ways to go about it. A friend of mine, like, the way he describes it is like, oh, it's like education, it's school. Like, you need to know how to defend yourself. So even if it's only one time a week, like, this is part of, like, you're doing something for your personal development education. Some people agree with that. Some people are totally hands off. Some people are like, the opposite of like, you need to be in the gym every day, 5 days a week. Like, so I don't know. I'm curious on Emma's experience with that, because that was not easy when your parents own the school and you're there every day and your sister's competing full time. Like, that's a lot of pressure, I would imagine.
Oh,
Yeah. Yeah, I think listening to everything that you guys have all been saying, I think a big takeaway, especially just thinking about our family in general, I think a lot of people look at our lives and think jujitsu is like kind of at the forefront, and that's what built the structure and all the things. And I think, at least from my perspective and my upbringing, I more feel that jujitsu kind of complements our lifestyle that was already implemented. Like my mom mentioned, our parents put a lot of effort into how they were going to raise us, the values that they wanted to uphold, and all that sort of thing. And jujitsu kind of became a complement to that, and it was an outlet through that. But I think it would have been very similar with other types of sports, other types of interests or hobbies or extracurriculars that we were involved in. Like my mom mentioned, we both did end up wrestling. I played some other sports. I'm now involved in other industries as well. And it's always kind of been the same energy of support and positive direction, but never force or disappointment if you didn't exceed or fulfill a specific idea, right? So it is kind of funny thinking about how people do, assume that we have this specific structure that's built from jujitsu, and I really think it just happened to be jujitsu, but it really could have been any other kind of industry that supported our family through kind of our upbringing and things like that. So that kind of plays into talking about what Kendall brought up, that I always felt, outside of the pressure from people that knew us, maybe were family friends, people at my schools and things like that, that thought that I was, going to fulfill a specific role through athletics. I never felt that way in my home. I never felt like at home I was supposed to uphold a certain thing. It was always whatever Emma wants to do, as long as you're working hard and you're, you know, putting in the right energy, we support Emma with what she wants to do. So it was for
Having
me,
fun.
yeah, having fun. So for me, I really more always felt pressure, I feel like, from society or from, teachers or other coaches or people that would ask me, oh, are you going to do what Kendall did? Or are you going to do this? Or, so it was really special to grow up in a household where I didn't feel that from the people that love me and, were my inner circle. So that was really special. And I think something unique to our family that most people are surprised to hear, that my parents did not force me on the mats at all. I found my own way there. And anytime I was there when I was younger, it was, a little bit of encouragement, and I ended up doing it. Of course, now being a brown belt, really passionate about jiu-jitsu, loving to compete. Of course, I'm like, oh, it would have been nice if I did what Kendall did and trained, intensely when I was younger and all of that. But I do think that the outcome may have been different. I found my own path there, and I have met a lot of friends through jiu-jitsu and wrestling who had that type A forced, practice and training, and athletic regimen from a young age that was really more encouraged on them than their own free will. And a lot of them burn out later, if you don't have that choice. So what Kendall has, like the passion that you see Kendall has, is a really unique thing, because she kind of has it on her own. It's not like somebody was like, hey, you're going to work really hard and do this thing and become a jiu-jitsu world champion. She like wants to be a jiu-jitsu world champion on her own. So it's kind of a different experience. And I think a good thing for people to understand, if you're looking at our family and wanting to recreate something, it might be a little less of a they think.
Well, and also too, like, to give a little insight into Emma for those who don't know, like she is a brown belt. She's super tough. She's my favorite training partner. Like, there's nobody better to, like, she's got the ingredients. Like, if she wanted to go be a world champion, like, there's no question that she could. I literally had coaches in wrestling in high school tell me that, and I agree, that if she wanted to, she'd be better than me, because the way that she picks up on technique, and like that, she's just an amazing athlete. But Emma, like right now, we're seeing her in her new little apartment. She just got this highly coveted, super hard to get paid internship at the Chicago Zoo. She's studying veterinarian medicine. Like there's no reality in which like she was supposed to be some other thing. But because she was able to like find all these other extraordinary paths that she wanted to walk down, but she was given the freedom to do that. She also is like a badass brown belt who can defend herself and feels comfortable walking around in the world. And like, she feels like it adds to her level of self-esteem, and also the play and the fun. So all of these things that parents are like, oh, I really just want my kid to keep training because, and it comes from a really great place, I think, a lot of the time. Like, I want her to be able to defend herself. I want them to feel comfortable. I don't want them to get bullied. Like, a lot of these things I think happened through Emma's own experience on the mats that didn't need to look like mine or somebody else's either.
Right.
And she also is now pursuing all this other stuff. Like, that wouldn't have existed if she would have been forced into one version of learning jiu-jitsu, one version of the path. So I think, is exactly as it was supposed to be.
Yeah, I agree.
Absolutely. No, and I love seeing how, like, and you touched on, for me, I look at jujitsu as a tool, right? And that tool could be yoga, that tool could be like taekwondo, that tool could be like anything, right? And so it's really awesome to hear about how you kind of opened up that opportunity for your daughters to explore whatever tools were out there. Here, this is jujitsu, it's here. It's for the taking, but take it or leave it, right? And I think a lot of the problem I see with these parents too is they start to live vicariously through their children, right? And that's a big one that I see in the community a lot. But I'm interested to see, like, in using jujitsu as a tool, how has that contributed to the development of your family dynamic as like mother-daughter, sister relationships? As I have mothers, I have sisters, and I'm sure that it kind of played a different factor when you're like, oh, we're having a bad day. I gotta choke it out, like my sister stole my clothes or whatever, like dang it, that was my favorite tank top. You stretched it out, right? So I'm curious to hear if that has contributed in any way to the health and development of your relationships with each other.
Yeah, I think one of the it's funny, Emma and I did an interview about this exact topic recently, and I would say that the level, like there's this quote, and I forget the exact quote, but it's something along the lines of like there's no greater bond than shared suffering, something along those lines. So I think that a couple of things. One, when you are going through, when you go, okay, so for people who are listening who train and their family doesn't train, when you go through a really tough training and you get tapped out and you want to cry, or you do cry, or you cry in the bathroom, or you feel bad about yourself or whatever, and you're like suffocated and that the giant guy sweats in your mouth and like all of these things, and you get tapped out a bunch of times. Like when you have these training sessions and then you can call somebody or talk to them and be like, dude, I got smashed today. Like, and your family understands the experience that you've had. It is such a different bond, I think, to share, even when you're not in a training session together, sharing the same experience in that moment. It's still a shared experience because you're bonding over the communication about what's going on with you in your internal environment. So, and your external environment, speaking of like the sweat, blood, and tears, or blood, sweat, and tears. So the shared suffering, I think, is a huge aspect of it. And then also the actual physical training together. You get to feel like, and Emma and I was mentioning, she's my favorite training partner. Like you get to feel this level of like trust and connection and love that you do get with other people over long periods of time as you develop. You train for a long time with people and your relationship gets really strong, but there's nothing like your family, like you're the people at the end of the day. I mean, I don't know if everyone has this with their family, but I have this with my family where I'm like, at the end of the day, like I know beyond a shadow of a doubt, like my family has my back, loves me, wants the best for me, and would never intentionally hurt me. And so that goes to another level. We're talking about jiu-jitsu because it's physical. So the intentionally hurt part, right? So you have this person who wants the best for you, is going to do anything they can to make it happen, but is also not going to hurt you. And you trust that you can train at a very high level. They're not going to leave you. You stop, you have a bad training day, someone's frustrated and you're like, okay, let's talk this out. Like we're not going anywhere. So let's make this work. So all of those things that come together, it's like the shared bond that we have with our best training partners. And then you add that to the family connection that you have. And then the last thing on top of that is the way that you get to know each other. I mean, the intimacy that comes with jiu-jitsu, one of the things I love about jiu-jitsu so much is, especially for adults, is I feel we stop playing as we get older. Like we stop playing and we stop having physical connection with other human beings. So, you look at the classic family unit and you ask the mom like who she has any physical intimacy with. It's like, oh, she plays with her kids and then she has her husband. And that's it. Like you don't, and as kids, we have this physical, we're made to play. We're made to wrestle, to fight, to, run around. And so jiu-jitsu provides the outlet, I think, for people to play and have this physical connection and intimacy with other human beings. So when you add that into doing it with your family, I believe the bond that it creates is less about like working out the tension or frustration. Although I think a lot of people do have that, like the couples like who are like, oh yeah, it's our therapy. I think people do have that. It's never felt quite like that for me. It may feel like that, for them, and they can speak to it too. It's more felt like a shared experience that brings us closer and also lets us in on who the other person is, because there's nothing for me like watching someone train or training with someone to get to know who they really are, because you can't hide. Like when someone's trying to break your arm, if you're going with people that are tough, you can hide. If you're just going with people you can smash all the time, then you can hide. But if you're going with people that are tough, and all my family members are tough and they push me, then who you are is like pretty on display. So I think letting yourself be seen also in trying very hard at something, because that means if you fail, you really failed, right? You weren't holding back. If you gave it your all and you're allowing yourself to be seen in that environment, there's a lot of intimacy that comes with that. And being really known and really seen by any human is very powerful. But especially for me, when it's my family, being really known and being really seen and really loved and all of the other things, wrapped into that is creates for a pretty unbreakable bond. It's pretty tight. It's not like anything I've experienced, anywhere else. That's for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, so many thoughts come with these questions, and also listening to you girls talking about these topics. Shama, I hear your in your questions or I see the images of the mothers and the daughters a lot, and of course we've had a lot of those, and many thoughts came to me in the last few comments as far as and we know that Jiu-Jitsu has a unique, we all agree, I think, that Jiu-Jitsu has a unique opportunity to create some sort of confrontation with the self, right? So if we're talking about mothers and daughters in particular, then there's a lot going on, alchemically, so to speak, right? Whether they're training in their own respective adult child classes or together and both. And so obviously we have many stories and things that developed over the years. So whittling it down to something meaningful. Even though there were times, I remember there were times when Kendall was a teenager and there might not have been somebody readily available. She was going to go do something that weekend. I'd say, okay, let's go down and get ready. And there was obviously some turning point in there where I decided, okay, you're not going to throw me anymore. Because I have like a little chip in my elbow and I have like this and that. I'm done with throws. So anyway, those were the teen years. And that obviously stuff like that happened. But ultimately, I think everyone really agrees is when they're reminded is that we're supposed to be having fun. Like Jiu-Jitsu is fun. That's why we love it, because it's fun. So it triggers all the competitive aspects of our personalities, and oftentimes a lot of this personal work. Kendall alluded to some of that. But to answer your, so I'd say to the mothers, remember that we live in this culture of, based on achievement and winning. And even though it sounds so funny for me to say even with both of them, like, oh, we just didn't prioritize that, but we really didn't. We really never have. So I'm really curious about what some other jiu-jitsu parents and other, I know there's some people starting like programs for working with parents, and I'm like, gosh, I wonder what they're saying. Because we never laid out like, okay, here's your, even with wrestling, when it was super organized Olympic sport and it's all laid out for you, every single event we were like, okay, you want to do this? You sure you want to do this? And because it was a lot of effort to do it every time, and it's like, I want to make sure it's coming from your personal destiny, what your little personal self journey. Now that doesn't mean we never ever had any pressure, or or we didn't look for coaches that had, because this pressure is part of achieving, pressure is part of learning and part of getting better. Using jiu-jitsu as a metaphor, if we didn't have pressure, we wouldn't know any jiu-jitsu at all. So that's our business, pressure. But at the same time, there's so much pressure in it that whenever you can take pressure off, that's when you're going to flow, and you're going to get a sweep, or you're going to get whatever. So it's this incredible balance. And jiu-jitsu is always a great metaphor for almost anything. It's I guess so many people have gotten good at that, like psychological metaphors. But they were subjected to that for their entire childhood in the car. Every single thing that was ever going on, we talked in metaphors. But just to answer your question, as far as like jiu-jitsu, or the question that you asked, it made me think of this story where us understanding what jiu-jitsu is like, and how that commingles between our interactions with each other. Kendall, one time when she started wrestling and I picked her up from school, she got in the car and she was absolutely just wiped out, like wrecked. And I was not used to seeing her like that. And she wouldn't talk to me. And then finally she just almost in tears, she goes, "You just don't understand. It's like switching from ping pong to tennis." And I was like, okay, I get it. And in a moment like that, I was so grateful that I had done some jujitsu, that I had done some judo, because otherwise I would have been absolutely struggling, reaching into no man's land for some empathy. I would have, and I could have, and parenting is such a tall order. I could have easily defaulted had I not been conscious enough to, oh, well, you got this. You just hard work, honey. More practices we'll get you into some extra, super special training, and we're going to get that fixed for you. And that's a lot of what people default to in parenting, coaching. And then conversely, like so anyway, so I was able to just listen and hear it and sit with it for a long time. And then another time, just a quick, parenting kind of like humility moment. I remember, I don't know, it's 4 or 5 years ago, we were at a tournament and I forget what I was saying, but Kendall turns to me and she goes, "Well, you're not a coach." And I was like, right. Yeah, that's right. And I just sat there like, okay, I'm not a coach.
Gosh.
And really, it's like, you gotta, that's a great parenting moment where it's like, no, you're not. Like, she was about to go compete. What if I would have been like, what? Yes, I mean, because with kids, it really is all about them. And that's why I read something this morning. A guy on Instagram said something about kids, like, they're not expensive, they're not this, they're not that. I had to refer, I was like, I'm not going to comment. Because I tell the girls, like, if I had a very wise mentor when I was their age that explained to me about children, that they're forever. They're forever.
Yeah.
It's not going to ever change. And if you don't want somebody to be more important, or at least as important as you, their needs, wishes, and wants, then maybe think twice. Hold off a little, because so much in sports with children is about coaches and about the adults involved. And it really, you said living vicariously through. I mean, that's the cliche, but people even, have so many ways of getting around that, feeling like they're not living vicariously, but they are still in the mix of it. And it is about them. And even we're not immune to that. Just because we have a lot of awareness and worked really hard, we still have had to go through like midlife reflections and look at it, relook at it, look at it again, because of what we're culturally embedded in with owning jiu-jitsu schools and having those. We all, of course, we want everyone to succeed. Who doesn't love having a champion? So we have to continue to go over that and be really honest with ourselves. Tom and I do. And that, you would think we could just, let that go. Like, it's been long enough.
Yeah.
But it's part of what we're culturally embedded in. So it's a requirement with both girls, no matter what stage we're at with it. So.
Right.
Absolutely. I'm curious, you kind of touched on it, and I'm curious to kind of dive into a little bit more. I know you talked about not putting a lot of pressure on your daughters and just kind of letting them explore and just giving them the tools. Like, here, this is what you have. But I know there are a lot of parents that are really like, I want my kid to compete. At what age do you think that competing competitively for kids is beneficial? Do you think there's drawbacks to that, them competing too early? And then also a big one that I see parents doing is actually supporting their kids on weight cuts. And I wanted to
Oh,
get your guys' thoughts on
God.
that. And what circumstances would that be acceptable, or do you think that maybe that's not something that's should be even on the radar for kids? But I will leave my opinion out of it. I want to get your opinions on that first.
I'm with
Emma, Kendall and I could talk all day about those things.
I know.
You want to take a turn though, because you had to run with it yourself. So love to hear.
Yeah. Yeah. In regards to weight cutting, I think with kids, my personal opinion is that that should be only something that is considered with adults. And even then, that has certain limitations. Um, in my personal experience, for anyone listening that is either a young athlete or has kids who are young athletes, and Kendall may agree with this, I performed way better, felt way more confident, felt healthier, all the things when I was not cutting weight. And I accepted that. It can be difficult in grappling when you are competing in a division where majority of the time, all the people that you're competing against probably dropped from a heavier weight. So there may be, if you are used to cutting weight, then there may be kind of an adjustment period of how can I develop my game or my personal athleticism competing against people with the knowledge that they might feel a little bit heavier or whatever that may be. But my overall feeling is that there are ways to get around it. And I definitely think for kids and young adults, it is not something that you should consider. With that being said, even the difference between the culture of that in jiu-jitsu and in wrestling and then in boxing and lots of different types of martial arts, there's a whole separate culture in each one that you could dive into. If we're talking about jiu-jitsu in particular, I think one way to kind of combat that is, like, for example, an IBJJF tournament, you have to weigh in right before you fight. So you don't get, most of the time, you're not going to get like a 24 hours before to replenish yourself and all that sort of thing. So I think that, if you're in a situation where you have kids or you yourself feel like your kids should be a certain weight class and things like that, I would encourage to only be signing up for tournaments where you can't really go ahead and do a bunch of weight cutting or dieting because you want, especially to a point that's very unhealthy, because you're going to have to fight right after and it will affect your performance 100%. And I think that's something that can be considered. But as far as kids being on diets outside of just what a normal, healthy, balanced diet looks like for a kid, is ridiculous and we should never do it, but it is a big issue in grappling. And I would just say from my personal experience being at wrestling camps with young kids that got dropped off for weeks, and the leaders of the camp were supposed to be overseeing the kids and their diet and their weight cuts, and we're talking about like 8-year-olds, and it's heartbreaking. And I will say, like, in my personal experience, especially with the knowledge I have now, it's 100% better to just compete at the weight that you're at, especially for kids, because we're not talking about the Olympics. We're talking about just your development and your life when you're an adult. Yeah, like it's not, that's a good point with bringing jiu-jitsu worldly. Like it's just a tournament. There are so many tournaments. There are gonna be hundreds. Even in jiu-jitsu, if someone says they're a jiu-jitsu world champion, we know what they might refer to most of the time, but there could be tons of tournaments that they're referring to, tons of belts, tons of weight classes, all the things. So it's just not that serious, I think. The best phrase to go about it. And it really also plays into, when you're talking about somebody who is not an adult yet, it is your job as their guardian to protect them in the world. And if you send this message that something is okay or encourage them to do something, you have that responsibility. So it's a huge weight to carry around for yourself, and you should not consider it lightly. It's a really big responsibility, especially for young girls and guys growing up with body image issues and all the things. One of my closest friends cut weight all throughout our adolescence for wrestling, and he struggled with body issues later on, which, and obviously for women, that's a whole big issue as well. So just lots of things to consider with it, I think.
And
It's not that
anecdotally,
serious. It's the
it's
right.
not that serious. Anecdotally, too, I love what you said at the end, Emma. Like, I think both of us can agree, and my mom's seen it for years. Almost, I mean, any single person, myself included, who had experience with weight cutting as a kid, and I'll just put a caveat out there, like, that was not my parents' choice. They fought me every step of the way, but that was a whole other thing. Wrestling community is pretty intense. But for any person that I know that was encouraged or had experience with weight cutting as a child, has body image, eating disorder issues, problems, they're, very overweight now. Like, so, I mean, this is a really sad thing to say, but you walk into a high school wrestling tournament and you look around and almost every single coach is extremely overweight. And this is a very, like, I have a lot of compassion in my heart for that, because I've been at weights higher than I've been comfortable with, not because I didn't know what to eat, right? Not because I didn't know and it wasn't active. And so I have a lot of compassion for that, but that gives you a big insight into the world of weight cutting. So just to, echo what Emma said, I think that it is completely ridiculous, irresponsible, and harmful, and very, very harmful to have children having any experience or relationship with their weight equaling okay or not okay. That is a huge issue for me. Like, is it okay or not okay if I weigh a certain thing? It's like, I don't even remember up until I was in high school, and it was really coaches I was having this conversation with. Like, I don't even ever remember what I competed at weight-wise in jiu-jitsu. It was never even like, I think they would like throw me on a scale just to see what I was, to sign me up. And that was it. Call it a day. Like, I think one of the things is that parents get, I want to have compassion for this too, is parents feel like, oh, okay, we'll say the weight class is 60 pounds. My kid's 61. If they don't go in the 59, then they're going to have to go with the kids that are 70. And my opinion on that is the experience that your child will have going in the 70-pound weight class, being supported, encouraged, and not thinking about their weight. Whatever downside or frustrations or challenges that are met in that scenario are as a much better case than the challenges met by, oh, you need to be 59 so that you can go with those 60-pound kids. Because the other piece of that is you're teaching them that if they are not at the top of the weight class, they are not good enough to win. And that is also just not a great place to start at if you're in sports in general. So I think I fully agree with Emma, and I have, very, very strong feelings about how irresponsible and harmful that this stuff can be. And I also will just say for anyone listening that may have struggled with this or may have had their children do this, I don't think it comes from a malicious place. I'm very aware of that. And we have a lot of parents and a lot of kids around us. I believe it comes from an uninformed place. So if we can do anything to say, hey, this is my experience, this is what I've seen, these are what's going on with my friends, this is going on with what the kids that we've got, there's a better way to do this than maybe we've been taught. I think that would be the goal, instead of shaming, a situation that's already happened. It's just like, okay, well, here's the education on what might be a better option in the future.
Yeah. And I think a really good point to bring up, piggybacking off of what Kendall said, and kind of talking about what we started our conversation today with, of using jujitsu in parenting, is being a part of the grappling community and growing up in a community like that is very empowering. And as a parent, you have the opportunity to utilize this community to complement your parenting. And I think a really great takeaway that you can teach your young kids is that, it's okay, whatever size you are, you're an athlete, you're putting in the right energy, we're having a healthy lifestyle, we're doing all the things, and what you show up as is okay. And I think that that is a really big takeaway, with just, this actually can be a tool. It doesn't need to be a struggle. Deciding whether or not to weight cut, or what weight your kids should go, or things like that, is actually really empowering. If you think of, actually, this can be a teaching moment for you. Like, no, you're going to go 70 because you're heavier than the weight below, and this weight is perfectly fine. And that's great. There's nothing wrong with that. And I think, when I had a really healthy relationship with my weight in high school, when I was wrestling, when I was, in really good shape, and I was still, I want to say probably at this time around 160, right? And I'm like, I'm like 16, I'm running probably 4 miles a day, plus a weightlifting, plus a wrestling practice at my school, probably also morning or late night practice in one day, right? And I'm eating really healthy. So I'm probably at like top physical, composition that I would be at that time. And I still weigh 160 pounds, which for a 16-year-old girl can be challenging because Kendall and I have always been bigger and taller girls. And when I was not weight cutting and I felt really confident and I was doing well and I felt really good, and I walked around with my Letterman's jacket with 160 on my sleeve, that was very empowering to grow up in an atmosphere where I was really comfortable to say what my weight was and for everyone to know. And I felt happy with that. And it didn't really occur to me until I stopped wrestling and I got to college that not many girls were very comfortable with sharing or letting people know what their weight was, right? Because I had grown up around everyone talking about their weight all the time, right? Through jiu-jitsu and wrestling. So when it occurred to me in college, I realized like, wow, this is really empowering in wrestling or jiu-jitsu or boxing, whatever, type of sport we're talking about that involves weighing in. It is actually a great tool if you can say, no, it's good. It's great. I'm healthy. I'm strong. I'm confident. I've trained hard with the skills that I need. And I can go whatever weight my actual weight is because that's where I'm meant to be. I'm meant to be at this weight or this size. And that's okay. And there's no reason to worry about anything else. That helped me build a lot of confidence in my body. And I think that that might be a big takeaway that adults who have kids that they're struggling with this concept of let's turn it into something really positive. And actually this can really be utilized in your upbringing and your child's self-confidence for men and women because it's really impactful in that way and build your confidence in your skill. Because if you're not worried about your weight, you're like, no, I'm skilled enough. I can do it. And I remember my parents kind of having that conversation with me when I had made the decision to stop cutting weight in wrestling because I was making a certain weight class. And I decided the next year to move up. And I remember and my sister as well, just being like, you have the skills that why would you need to, you're skilled enough. And even if you don't win, that's okay too. It doesn't, it's not going to be this whole, even if you could make weight at the lower weight class and win state at the lower weight class. And then if you go the higher one, then you don't win state, whatever it may be, it's not worth your health, right? Like health is the number one priority, mental and physical. So I think that's
happiness. Like you want to like your life. It's
right.
Like, you want to like your life,
So
Yeah, you guys have really triggered a lot of thoughts for me. I mean, it's called depth psychology, Jungian psychology, or and as a depth psychologist, so to speak, my work in writing on jiu-jitsu really is formulated around the individual path of the jiu-jitsu athlete and also what's happening as the BJJ industry evolves. So that would be the collective aspect. That's a word. All these words are very common nowadays. They didn't used to be, but all these Jungian terms, but the collective psyche, and we could also call jiu-jitsu we're almost at the point where some people would call it a somatic psychological practice. So what the girls have been talking about are some of those individual processes. And then what you brought up, Shama, was the fact that we have a million gazillion tournaments now. Whereas when Kendall was a girl, I can tell you stories about the first time that the California kids got together.
Yep.
And so, and when the girls came and now we have, we have certain teams that have the development of the elite athlete in young children, sort of like what we see in gymnastics is like the priority. So we all, and at the same time, if we all think of the types of things we see on Instagram these days, or even just gymnastics, again, that's my history. So it's always my default. look at what they do in gymnastics compared to what they did 20 years ago, or heaven forbid, when I was a girl and I saw Olga Korbut in 1972. Well, she was doing some crazy stuff. But like if you watch parkour and you see like kids jumping from building to building, nobody did that when I was a kid. That just wasn't what. So humans are evolving. Something's going on. So we're not going to put a stop to this, elite athlete and child athlete development of, but at the same time, it's a conflict. It's a huge conflict in jiu-jitsu because jiu-jitsu is about a healthy lifestyle. I almost interrupted when Emma was talking. Emma's become almost like a certified nutritionist on her own volition. She doesn't have the certification, but she's both of this topic with regard to weight cutting is something that all of it this is like a whole book, just this one thing.
Sure.
But anyway, the gap between the healthy lifestyle versus the development of the elite athlete is a really big place to work for our industry and for us, each of us individually, because without some parameters and without some healthy parameters, like mat side weigh-ins, at least we have that. Wrestling doesn't have that. And a lot of communication. And then as the girls were talking, it was almost overwhelming to me to think of what's really needed as far as mentorship for young girls. Like this is a kind of like the work that you're doing is so critical and key to this almost emotional, because it's such a key to the gap that I'm describing. Because without that type of mentorship, people are going to be really lost at sea and just kind of grabbing on to whatever looks right at the time. And so I'm so grateful that you're doing the gatherings with the women, and there's nothing against men, but it's a lot of times in many cultures, the women are the ones that do have this type of information. They develop it and they codify it and they share it, and then things get done. So it's the way things work oftentimes. So
Oh, well,
Yeah.
thank you. That means a lot, and I think it comes from a product of our time, right? Because you and I didn't have anybody really,
no.
there. And so
Well, now I'll just mention one person, Chris Shaw, lives
yes,
near.
I love Chris Shaw.
Yeah, and there were times where during those years where I was able to get with somebody. She was one. I'm sure I'll think of some others, but she was somebody that offered her time and was very open and wonderful to talk with, and I just love her.
She's amazing. Yeah, Chris Shaw is absolutely amazing. Yeah, you were in California, so you were like the only one. I was in Texas going, there's nobody here. Like I had to look through the Brazilians, like Leticia, like all of them, because that's really a product of my time. But I know we're getting close on time, and I had a couple more things that I wanted to dive into. We will just skirt it. If you guys need to cut me off at any point, if you need to run, let me know. But I really wanted to talk about some of the dark underbelly of the jiu-jitsu world. And I know you know what I'm talking about, especially as parents, we are seeing more and more incidents of sexual predators in the jiu-jitsu community. There was an incident recently in San Antonio where an instructor was having a relationship with a student. The parents were actually aware of it and were, from what I understand, were condoning it because he said he would marry her when she was old enough. And so that's one of many incidents that we've seen out there. And so I wanted to talk about, some parents are not aware of this aspect in jiu-jitsu. They're new. Maybe they think, oh, this person's a great instructor. He's trusting. And so I wanted to kind of tap into red flags. Maybe if you had any advice on, I know you've been around in the scene for a while, you raised daughters, you had a unique situation to where you taught your children, but not all the parents have that control, right? They're leaving their children in the hands of others. So I wanted to talk about some things that maybe you could think that would help parents best protect their children and recognize red flags in their academies.
Man, where to start?
I know this is a big one. I opened up a giant can of worms and we're running out of time, but it had to be done.
You know what's interesting is I the other day I didn't know that this existed, but Safe Sport has a really interesting certification around sexual predators and harassment. And have you done it or have you seen it? No. Yeah. So the reason I ended up having to do it is because I had to renew my membership with USA Grappling, which is connected with USA Wrestling, specifically to do this event that I'm going to do in October. And it's kind of a pain in the ass because the course is really long. You can't skip through anything. You have to watch all the video. I mean, it needs to be like that, but it was just funny as I was going through it. I was like, wow. So this thing was so fascinating because it talks a lot about the things to look out for. And it's kind of going along, it's assuming that, parents are, have their heads screwed on straight. I mean, that story you told is very scary, but this is assuming that, the parents have the best children, have their children's best interests at heart, and they might not know the signs and stuff to look out for. Some of the stuff that it mentioned was really interesting, like no outside communication on the phones, right? Like, oh, the coaches don't text my kids, they go through me. Like, that's one thing, where like underage people do not need to be texting their instructors, right? That's one piece. Another piece was like, if coaches are like giving gifts to kids or like saying that they need to work with them one-on-one in any capacity without an adult present. These are some of the obvious things. Like, some of them are more obvious than others, right? Like, we know that oftentimes, like, we wouldn't leave our kid alone with an adult, but a lot of times it's not that clear cut when a kid shows a lot of promise and the coach shows interest, because it's like, oh yeah, okay, he wants to give her one-on-one attention. This stuff is really sticky. So I don't know. The world it can be like, it's a great place. I like to believe that most people are good, but there's also a lot of scary stuff, and we shouldn't turn a blind eye to it. So I would just, some of the things for parents is like, you don't want to be paranoid and live in fear, but there's nothing wrong with it. It's so funny. I was gonna say having your eye on things. It's so funny. I remember my dad told me this one time, or maybe it was my mom, actually. I don't know. I'm not sure. One of you guys said, like, you're going to get in enough trouble on your own, even if I am trying to be strict and keep an eye on everything. So I'm going to do the best I can to keep an eye on everything, because kids are sneaky and do so. So that's kind of a different going down a different rabbit hole. But for this topic in particular, it's like, I don't ever feel like I was in danger of any kind of experience with adults because my parents had their eye on stuff. I mean, they were involved. That's another piece. They were very, very involved. My parents had their own relationships with coaches and their own communication with all the adults that we were around. And it was never like, oh yeah, okay, you can go do something with this person. So there's a lot of topics to get into with this particular area, but that's one of the things that I feel is a good safety net, because you might find yourself in a sticky situation, but if you're really plugged in and you're having your own communication relationship with the adults that are around, I would imagine that you're going to pick stuff up a lot faster, and be able to, exit out of that community or make a different choice or do something.
Yeah. Kendall, you just reminded me of a one time when you started wrestling, or maybe it was even in judo, and Anne Marie, Rhonda's mom, came to me and she goes, don't ever let her go anywhere alone on a trip. And I was like, I wasn't planning on it. I won't. I mean, she was just like, yeah, just don't do it. Don't ever do it. I don't think she would mind. I mean, she's pretty forthright gal.
Yeah.
I don't think she would mind me sharing that story, but it's such a huge topic. The daunting thing to say about it is that briefly is that I hate to say it, but I feel like we're behind the 8 ball here with the growth of jiu-jitsu and a total scramble to try to figure this out. So even and another daunting, sobering thing, the safe sport program is good. So many of the programs set in place in Olympic sports and other sports are great. And as we all know, there's still way too many examples of things that go on that shouldn't be happening.
Well, sorry to cut you off. I just wanted to mention with the safe sport thing, what really stuck with me was, yes, everybody has to take that, all the coaches. But what I found more powerful is that the parents had to go through it and the athletes themselves, because like you're saying, Mom, like there's all this great stuff, but predators are predators and people who want to do bad. But when the parents and the kids are having to become aware of more of these patterns, it's like, I mean, you can speak for this better than I can as I'm not a parent. I would imagine that you can try to do every single thing right and be in the right place and have your eyes on stuff. And there can be things that can happen.
Yes.
That's a really scary feeling. And maybe, kind of a helpless thing. That's like the human condition that's really hard. And kids are going to go through stuff that you couldn't stop from happening. But in these kind of environments, it's like, give ourselves the best shot at having a safe experience. And I mean, I definitely feel like you guys did that.
True. And it reminds me of like this is the county offers these parenting classes and anger management. And then we have these addiction classes that people get mandated to. Those classes are great for everyone, everybody. They're just like basic good stuff, just like high school students learning basic financial management, budgeting and stuff like that. So these educational measures, obviously should be in place and can be developed. And like I was saying, we're a little behind the 8 ball here in jiu-jitsu because we've grown so fast. And I do know, people are trying to address things more readily. In Gracie Baja, we've scrambled pretty hard to try to develop some structures at least for reprimanding. And so to send out the message, hey, this stuff is not going to fly. And hopefully, because Gracie Baja has a leadership stance with number of students and schools globally, that message will go out to the entire industry that, hey, we're not going to stand for this. Is not what we do. And small, medium, and large things, not just the really egregious, like the worst of the worst, like the story you mentioned. But I'll just say that this is always my default, and it's meaningful, but it also can feel kind of futile, because ultimately, how do we address this philosophically, the fact that coaching, like many child athletes will tell you in their adult life, you'll ask them, who was the most important person in your life, who had the most impact on your life? Like, how do we ever get to the point where we really understand the relevance, importance, and reverence of what a sports coach actually is in the world? It's, we just don't think of it like that. I'm famous for talking to our staff this way, and I know half the time they're like, yeah. But it's teaching kids what's more important. What's a more important job? And so I think, I know in Gracie Baja, that's one of the reasons why there's such an initiative to create a good business model so that people can actually make a living doing this and do what they love, but also because it is so important. It has such a huge impact on communities and humanity. And if jiu-jitsu keeps growing like it's been growing, then I don't mean to be lofty, but that means that we're having a huge impact on humanity. We really are. So what structures need to be put in place? How do we deter these things? Huge, huge important questions that, you know, we I could lose sleep over that. I have to it's gonna develop, but you know, again, the work that you're doing, even having this conversation, even to be asked to comment on it. And I am proud of the Gracie Baja leadership for it took a little to get some of that that's developed in the last 4 or 5 years, but we've made a lot of strides with that. And I'm so happy to see that happening, because I was kind of knocking on the door saying, guys, this is going to get big. This is going to get bad, and we need to be ready.
Yeah.
So it's encouraging to see that, like, everyone's awake now and paying attention.
And some of it hasn't really
right
been made
away.
public. Some of it hasn't been made public really too much. Yeah, I mean, that's kind of the nature of these things. Like, they kind of happen in the back, but it is shifting a lot. We've been a part of that in the last few years with Gracie Baja, and I'm proud of that. And I think it's starting to leak out into some other parts of our industry as well. And I think one of the pieces that we haven't really spoken about yet that's missing is, like, well, and Holly brought it up, is the education to coaches about the responsibility that they have and the positions that they're in. You know, someone said this to me recently, and then I kind of repeated it back to our staff, is that it is a huge, huge, huge privilege and honor to be entrusted with, especially children. Like, when parents are bringing their child to you, they're not just investing their time, energy, and money. They're also investing, I mean, that's a huge deal in itself, but it's also the trust that you're going to do what you say you're going to do, that you're going to create a safe environment for them. You're going to take care of them. Like, you're so impactful on their hearts and their minds and their way that they're evolving. And that's a big responsibility. And, you know, my dad says this sometimes. He said it to our staff once. He's like, well, if you don't want to be in a leadership position, you can't take this job. Like, you're in the wrong role. Like, if you don't want to think about it as like, okay, people are going to copy me, they're going to do what I say, they're going to be more like me, because it's like in a hierarchical environment, which we do have in martial arts, right? Like, it's people, it's not that we want to remove all of the history of martial arts and have, you know, we need a teacher coach or a coach student dynamic. So yes, we do have some of that. Yes, sometimes it gets out of hand, it gets really dramatic, and that's what we're talking about, can be problematic, but respecting the hierarchical nature of what we do and the power dynamics that we have when we're on the mats, and that's something that I didn't always understand either. Like, I'm still learning about it all the time, but especially now, I think I have a lot more respect for that, of like, wow, I really need to watch like what I say, what I do, how I interact with people, like where my boundaries are, different things, because I'm in a pretty big role when I'm teaching a class or in these schools. So it's something that we try to get through to our staff as well. I think that piece of education is part of what's missing, because I think for sure there's a lot of malicious behavior out there, but there's also stuff that just kind of happens because it's human nature and human behavior, and like being able to have some compassion for that and being like, okay, well, what's wrong with the education here? How come that wasn't clear to us, you know? And then getting back to doing that, like, you know, I know it can feel overwhelming in general when and this is not an original idea, I don't remember where I heard this, but it was like, we want to impact the world, but sometimes the biggest way to impact the world is to impact our own home, like what's going on in our own home with our relationships. So with our schools, it's like, you know, communicating to, for anybody here who has, you know, fellow staff members, or maybe they have their own school, or maybe even just if you've been around your school for a while and you feel like you have the power to impact your environment, because you have the power to impact your environment. So if there's a way to educate the people around us and take that responsibility more seriously and really kind of think through, like, how is this going, like, that phrase, if you don't want to be in a leadership position where people are going to start following what you do and being more like you because they're idolizing you and putting you on a pedestal, whether that's fair or not, by the way, like, we all know the sensei, black belt, like, we put people on these pedestals that it's like fair, not fair. It doesn't really matter. It's what we do. It's human nature. Like that's at least what I've learned, what I feel. So we project onto them that they are to be, you know, followed and emulated. So if you're not comfortable being put in that position and taking that seriously, then you're probably then you need to have the self-awareness to step away from it, because it's dangerous if we don't. So I think
Well,
that piece of education could be really helpful.
And also, how do we help people as well? Because the situation that the story you told us, Shama, that's extreme. That's obviously very extreme. But aside from, how about when all the human things happen to people and they own a jiu-jitsu school, or they're a professor, or they're a coach, how do we help people so they don't just simply get ejected out of jiu-jitsu for good? Because we're all human. So like if you're a teacher in the school system and you have an employee assistance program and you take a sabbatical, or you take you do some sort of a treatment, or you get this kind of help or assistance or whatever. Like, I mean, that is essentially what we would need, something like that, to do our best work with our coaches and professors, school owners, and everyone in the industry, to help people grow and change and meet their own personal challenges. Now with the extreme things that we see, and we see those, when they come up, they get, I guess it's BJJEE is the one that puts it up first, usually, like a drama thing. And but we've heard stories of these horrible things happening and nothing happening, and nobody gets has any consequences, and it is just crazy. And in the old days, I think this kind of thing could happen in sports and people might not hear about it. So we're definitely in a new era, and thank God for that, because we can address things. But then what happens when people get accused of something they didn't do? Because that's happening too. Like, people can actually post and put whatever they want on social media. So it's like super scary to be in a leadership role sometimes in those cases. So it's kind of, it's crazy times. It's important stuff to talk about. That's for sure. That's for sure. And building structures in our industry, having strong infrastructure, and having the women involved in that is really important, because the women are here. Now we have a situation where, and at least I can kind of estimate in Gracie Baja, it's like 30-40% maybe the student base is female in many cases, maybe not always across the board, but that's pretty big deal compared to 2010, where it was like somewhere in 2 or 3%.
Yeah, it's been astronomical growth. It's like within the past 10 years. So I'm going to close out with one last question that I know that everybody who's tuned in, Kendall was the first one they ever talked to. And I remember the first time I talked to you, you were like still kind of a teenager, very early 20s. And I was just so impressed. I was like, wow, this is like a teenager that's like, who raised this woman? And so my question to you, Holly, is like, what are some things that you have used to raise strong women? Like, what is some advice that you can offer moms? And as daughters, what are some things that you've learned from both your parents, that you hope to implement once you have kids?
That's another book for you, Mom.
I'm sorry.
How to raise strong.
I know you gotta go.
No, you're good.
My first thought is that I'm not sure I ever focused a whole heck of a lot on female issues, or differentiating you from, I mean, it did come up because of your activities, but I'll defer. What?
Defer. Go for it.
Yeah, I think when kind of what my mom is saying, my first thought with that is, I don't think we were really raised with the concept of, oh, you're a woman, so you're going to face X, Y, and Z issues, or, oh, because you're a girl, you need to think about X, Y, and Z all the time to be stronger in this scenario. It was really just like, I always felt, at least, and I'm pretty sure Kendall probably felt pretty similar, that we showed up into this world with who we were, and we just received a ton of love and support, a ton of, confidence building exercises, and just kind of like instillment of values, of a good person, of a person that has a strong relationship with yourself, and all that sort of thing, having strong mindset. And that just helped us in society as women. But it probably would have been very similar, if we had a brother growing up or something like that. And I think that is really important, because when if I've ever been in a space where I kind of felt like I was victim because I was a girl in a space, that was primarily male, maybe. I kind of felt myself leaning on that crutch a little bit. And I think there's a healthy relationship with it, right? Of course, it's important to acknowledge different struggles that we have as women, issues that you may face and how to combat that. But I think also it's very empowering to recognize that you don't have to live life every day with this idea of, I'm a woman, so I'm going to face X, Y, and Z problems in particular to me, right? Because there have been a lot of times, maybe I've even been in jiu-jitsu classes where there were more women than men in the class, and maybe a lot of the men that were there were white belts, and we're talking about a bunch of colored belt women that they had to roll with that were bigger than them or whatever, So I think as far as parenting, from my perspective, it was just like, we love you for who you are, and we will help you get through any struggles that come up. But it wasn't that there was this instillment of an expectation for struggles or things that we would be facing. It was more just, we're going to give you the tools to get through whatever you may face, regardless of what the source of it was.
Yeah, I agree with everything Emma said. And also, I would add that I feel like whether we had come out as girls or boys, my parents made it pretty clear to us that one of their primary driving forces in raising children was to ensure that we had high levels of self-esteem. So it was like, if I had a high level of self-esteem, like I always felt, for example, like my voice mattered, like my opinion. Doesn't mean that I ran the that I ran the show, although I would have liked to run the show. But it was like, our opinion in the small stuff mattered in the same way that it did in big stuff. And then it would be like, okay, well, I hear you, and this is what we're going to do anyway, because this is like, blah, blah, blah. But I think that as things arose, they were met with compassion and as much explanation as was needed. But because we did have stuff that came up, like, but also the other piece of that is the balance that I imagine it being very difficult, and I suppose I'll find out one day, but the balance of wanting your child to have a happy, safe, fun life, and then also allow them to struggle and go through stuff that's hard would probably be very difficult. How do you not try to protect them from everything, but also protect them enough and, monitor that experience? And then how much do you actually have control over? Because there's so much that we don't control, and you just do the best with what you have. But the last piece on that before, my mom answers too, is a lot of this was just modeled to us. Like we just watched we learned so much through how our parents, speak to us and guide us and give us direction, but also just the way that my parents were. Like my mom was, or is, and was, I've been thinking about when we were kids, she was very present in our lives, like very much committed to making sure that we were having a lot of fun. We were feeling loved. We felt supported. We had what we needed. We were listened to, our opinions mattered. And also, like, she found a way to do this really cool hybrid program at school where she could go for 3 days, do her thing, then come back. Like both of our parents were around a lot. And we watched them chase their own individual passions while also feeling like we came first and we were important in their lives. So I think as far as like being a woman in today's world where there's this weird expectation of like, women can do it all and should do it all and in high heels and they're going to raise kids and they're going to make all the money and like we're going to be famous and we're like, God, like talk about a lot of pressure. Like I feel that I was provided with an example to follow of somebody who was doing their best to live a life that was fulfilling to them and love the people around them at the same time. And so when I think about like a strong woman, that's, I think, that's a pretty aspirational place to start. Like that's not an easy thing to do, an easy thing to accomplish. So I think it had to do with a lot of what we were told, but also just what I saw, like what I was shown.
Yeah.
I was going to try to look it up here and see. I forgot, that Cahill Gibran poem on parenting. A lot of people have seen it. Have you guys seen that?
Maybe.
I'm surprised Dad hasn't shown it to you before. It starts out, I think it says something like, your children are not yours, they are of the earth, or
Mm.
it's called On Children. And it says, you are the bows from which your children as living arrows are sent forth. You may give them your love, but not your thoughts, for they have their own thoughts. You may house their bodies, but not their souls. It's a good one. I've been kind of reflecting on this whole conversation, thinking like, if somebody actually listens to this whole thing, they might start thinking that we have some sort of like BJJ utopia family or something like that. I don't want that, because we have had plenty of struggles, and in every area of everything, it's been, just very human in every way, every possible way. I suppose if as parents, if there is something that Tom and I could claim as like that we were good at, some of those instructions in that poem, we really took those things to heart. And jiu-jitsu and other sports careers included. When Kendall first came to us, it was clear that she was already had the mindset of a Navy SEAL, or I won't say freight train, I used to say freight train, but she had a lot of energy, and we were charged with the task of figuring out how to deal with that. And I really believe that jiu-jitsu is the biggest gift, one of the biggest gifts for a nervous system like hers at 4 or 5 years old. So we don't have a quantitative study to prove it, but the idea for me has always been, what if not for jiu-jitsu? I don't know what would have happened. But to speak to your question about women, just briefly, and tie some of these other things that I've mentioned in, when Kendall was a senior in high school, we went to the paper, and she got to be on the cover of the sports page, and she did this interview. And I was sitting there listening, and it was great. And then I was listening, and I was kind of surprised and at some of the things that she was answering to this interviewer. And we got in the car to go home, and I turned to her and I said, hey, you never told me about all that. Because she'd been talking to this interviewer about the challenges with training with the boys, and the boys beating up the girls, and the guys not wanting them to be there sometime, heaven forbid, Coach Jose or somebody's ever sees this. But she, she's still really, really young at the time. And she just turned to me and she goes, well, I never thought about it. And I've relayed this story many times, because as a psychologist, that is like, what? What? Like, wait a minute, I was there the whole time. I was asking you questions every day. I was asking about, so just to kind of speak to the fact that without going into, gory details and difficulties and shadow and all that, just as a snippet of a story, Emma's journey, Kendall's journey has so many different stops, starts, chapters, things that happen along the way. And that one, you know, as great as I feel about what I said about the poem and the concepts, as good of a report as they give, you know, that we were good parents or that we handled things well. That went on for 4 years. And I mean, that's where I'm like, oh my gosh, like I had no idea. Those boys were being mean to you every day for like 4 years. We thought we were being like hands-off parents by not meddling all the time and showing up and being like type A parents in the doorway. And instead, I'm like, we should have showed up more often. So what I knew I wanted to teach those boys some jujitsu. I really did. No, I used to say that about wrestling. Like, can't they just learn some submissions? Like they need to know them. They need to know the submissions. But anyway, I really appreciate being able to reflect on some of these things. And I just didn't want to leave it on that note of like,
Yeah.
you know, one more time. Hey, we just want to be like you guys. We're hearing that a lot. And we're seeing all these, like you mentioned, Sean, we're seeing all this driven elite athleticism in the youth. And obviously that's very concerning in any sport because
Oh, yeah.
not all babies are born
No.
to be a Navy SEAL, right? Some
Yeah.
are. And then some are going to develop those qualities later on, like we saw in Emma. But for her young years, I thought she was going to be an artist. I was like, she's my artist. She ended up developing those things and showing, we always kind of thought it was in there. And then she showed us that it was. But a lot of kids, you know, every single human being is different. And so where are coaches and parents maneuvering and shaping and molding, and where's that coming from? Where is the industry doing that? And what can we do to create, you know, I don't have the answers. I'm like you, I have more questions probably than anything else, but what can we do to show up to continue to emphasize the healthy individual development in each and every jiu-jitsu athlete? It's not going to be perfect, but to prioritize that somehow. And yeah, we've got our biases. I think we can agree, like things are really, really going heavy on the intense side. And so with all those concerns noted, I think this conversation, and it definitely triggers a lot of thought for me on, maybe we should do some writing. Maybe I should, the people in my internal committee. I know I can't make Kendall and Emma do it. They're too busy.
No, I was gonna end it out with like, I hope that you're gonna write a book because like you say, you know, I know that a lot of people come and say, oh, how did you do it? You guys are this great family. Well, you know what? You are just talking to you, like you can feel it. Like you may not have cracked the code, but you cracked the code that works for your family unit. And I think that you tapped on that. Like you've supported your children and allowed them the tools to become who they are, and you've done a phenomenal job with that. And like I said, please write a book. I will endorse it. I will promote the heck out of it because I think you have a wealth of knowledge, just not just in your own experiences, but in your clinical background as well. And I think that a lot of parents will pick it up and buy it. So stay tuned for a book coming out. No, but thank you again so much.
What you're doing is phenomenal, and we are so excited to be connected to it. I'm so grateful to hear about it. It's just wonderful work. Kudos to you and your team and all the success that you've had in that.
Thank you so much. It takes a village, you know, it takes support from all individuals like yourself to be able to do what I've done for so long. And like I joke and say I was just one of many girls in a gis that just really wanted to bring the change that I saw jujitsu could have. And I anticipated the growth that it would have. And I really wanted women to have a safe space within that so that we could grow and flourish. But I know you all have to go. Thank you so much for being a part of this. I really appreciate you taking the time to share your story, your knowledge, your insight. And I could talk to you guys all day, but I know you got lives, so we'll wrap it up. I'll talk to you later. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. Thank you so much for being a part of this discussion, and I look forward to talking to you guys more.
Hope to
Thanks,
see you
guys.
soon.
Thank you. Thanks
Thank
so
you
much.
so much.